Hey everyone, I'm Patrick Jones and welcome to 81. Welcome to 81 without any context. But I guess you know what it is. Episode 81 of That Gives Me Anxiety. You know, the intros have never been my strong suit, right? I guess a podcast about anxiety, you don't want it to be too polished, do you? Maybe you do. I don't know. I'm talking to myself in a room. Man, property's under attack. It's under attack. It's not being dramatic in any way, shape, or form. Got these Japanese beetles that are just like tearing through anything growing. Mowed the lawn, and there's hundreds of them coming out of the lawn. All over the hydrangeas. Or all of our neighbors are dealing with this too. It's frustrating, we've had people come out and spray, and it kills them, but then more of them come out of the ground or fly over here. Our block has something going on where these beetles are like, yeah, all right, this is where we're gonna be. I got a trap specific for Japanese beetles, and it's just like a bag with this little thing that they like land on, and I don't know, they eat, they smell something, and they drop in, and this bag is filling up with them. They're not as small as a housefly. They're, like your thumbnail size. I don't know how big your thumbnail is, but not a housefly. Much bigger than that. And I've just got a bag of dead ones. I don't know why my New York accent came out with that. I got a bag of dead ones. Hey, yeah, it's just like a few of them hanging around, eating. Great, whatever, We're in nature. But when they're just swarming everything and destroying everything, it's a problem, it's a problem. But aside from my battle with the Japanese beetles, we also were able to get out for our first beach day, which was really nice, going down to Sullivan's Island. If you've ever been to Charleston, Sullivan's Island's the best beach. Got some Mexican food on the beach after. Life is good, right? Just sitting on the beach, relaxing. I didn't get sunburned. Suntan lotion, who knew? Me. or didn't think I needed it for the first 32 years of my life. But I've got a great episode lined up here for you. It's part one of a two-part series on artificial intelligence. I interviewed Kathleen Walch and Ron Schmelzer, who are both managing directors at Cognilytica and co-hosts of the AI Today podcast. So yeah, there's a lot that people are afraid of with AI, from job loss to the Terminator. And I had so much fun asking Kathleen and Ron questions about AI and like how it works and what the hurdles are and what we should be doing to potentially stop people from making the Terminator. But the interview went kind of long, so I'm making it into 2 episodes here. Before we get to part 1 of the interview here, I just want to remind you, if you're liking the show, to please remember to rate and review it. 5 stars. Weigh in on your feelings on AI in the review. You can check the show out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. YouTube, you can comment about how I brush my hair. Got a Dr. Dog shirt on. Yep. Don't want to miss that. If you're liking the show and you want to make a donation, you can do so through the Buy Me a Coffee link. And and I also want to remind you of my partnership with Pure Spectrum CBD, who offer the promo code AnxietyPod for 15% off. Everything from solves to mints to gummies, whatever you need for CBD, for pet stuff, they've got it. And I've basically tried everything they have, and I'm a huge fan. So I definitely recommend them. Well, now I think it's time to go chat with Kathleen and Ron about AI. As always, thank you so much for listening, and enjoy. Joining me now on the podcast to talk about anxiety related to artificial intelligence, I have Kathleen Walch and Ronald Schmelzer from the AI Today podcast. Guys, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thrilled to be a part of it.
Yeah, I had to say anxiety related to AI in such like a movie voice. I don't know. When you hear about people being anxious about AI, does that make you cringe a little bit, or are you just like, oh, it's all in fun kind of thing?
Yeah.
So, it's interesting because we've been covering AI on our AI Today podcast since 2017, but the idea of artificial intelligence has been around for a lot longer than that. And the term was officially coined in 1956. So it's been around for decades now at this point. What's different between the AI of 1956 and the AI of now really is that it's in our everyday lives. So before it was really just governments that were investing and using the technology. Then we went through our first AI winter in the 1970s, which was a period of decline in investment and in research, fell out of favor. Then in the 80s, we had our second wave of AI. So this was really around expert systems where we had computers on every desktop. And so organizations said, what can I do with this? How can we kind of bring these expert knowledge workers to the laptops? And so this idea of the expert system was born. But they ended up being very brittle and, were very complex. So we went into our second AI winter and we had another period of decline. And then in maybe the mid 2000s, we had our next wave of AI, which is where we are now. Things continued to grow and evolve. But what's different about this wave is that it really went from just governments investing to maybe governments and large organizations, but it was stayed in the organization, right? It stayed in the enterprise. Now it's been brought out of the enterprise. So we have it in our everyday lives, whether or not we know we're using it. So if for GPS, helping us write emails. Now Chat GPT is the big thing that everyone's talking about, large language models, Google Bard, where it's helping us write many different things, right? Helping us craft novels and write essays and all of that stuff. So now it's really kind of gone from that idea of science fiction to real life. And I think that is what can sometimes cause anxiety and stress. Another thing that we've talked about, and I'll let Ron chime in as well, is that AI, a lot of people are so afraid that it's going to replace their jobs and that it's going to be a job killer. And what do we do? And now look at this. It's so amazing. It's so powerful. Before you know it, you're not going to need humans to do anything. And I think that creates a lot of anxiety. We also talk about fears and concerns related to AI, and some can be very emotional, and you have to address that because that's how people feel.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and to sort of add to that, I think the interesting thing about science fiction is that it latches onto the idea of intelligent machines, which is really kind of what this AI thing is generally about, which is how do we make things that are not intelligent, give them the power of intelligence, which of course is machines, right? It all goes back to robots and RUR, Karl Čapek's novel from the 1920s, which is where the term robot was coined. But we see it in all this science fiction. Now we see sort of good AI. So if you watch Star Trek, computer and Star Trek is a pretty benevolent thing. Let's put the Borg aside for a moment. And then even in Star Wars, we got R2-D2 and C-3PO. They're good for a lot of yucks. I mean,
Yeah.
there's some happy little characters, but then we got the Terminator. Then we have Wall-E, and so it's like all these things where we see in the giving the inanimate object the power of intelligence, the benefits and the problems, and sort of some people gravitate to, but look at all the cool things, and some people gravitate to, but wait a second here, I saw Terminator, it didn't end that well. So
it's the new like glass half empty and glass half full, right? Is the AI going to help with like comedic timing or just take over the entire planet?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I wanted to give you guys a chance to talk about like your background in AI and your podcast a little bit, so people have an understanding of where you're coming from in this discussion.
Yes, this is really interesting. So Kathleen and I actually started working together a while back, more focused on the startup ecosystem around this thing called Tech Breakfast, which was a morning demo focused event, both very entrepreneurial. And we were doing that for many years. It started in 2011 when startup wave started cresting and it started growing. And what we started noticing was that about the midpoint of the 2010s, like 2015, 2016, all of a sudden, a lot of the demos started adding AI and actually started very innocuously. It wasn't like AI, like this is what we're doing. It started with things like voice. And that was like the first little tip off. Like, that's interesting. Amazon's releasing a voice assistant, Alexa. Google's releasing a voice assistant. Oh, Microsoft's releasing a voice assistant. Samsung's adding it to their phone. Apple's doing Siri. What's going on here? Because this is, why are we focusing on this? This is sort of a random thing to focus on. And then we started seeing the thing that Kathleen might not have mentioned. This thing that was powering this third wave was big data. That was the little missing piece that we didn't have in the first wave or the second wave, because computers were very rare during the first wave. And during the second wave, we were still very much limited to the power of the server and the desktop. Now we got trillions of data coming from the internet every day, and we could train our systems. And then we have these large companies, Amazon, Google, Facebook, all these guys, Meta, they're like saying, ooh, we can do interesting things with algorithms. Again, glass half empty, half full on what they're doing with those algorithms. And they spurred the innovation with the growth of AI. And it was from that, when we saw that, we're like, well, let's focus more on this AI thing. This AI trend is becoming more than a trend. And we started actually with the podcast. We started with AI Today podcast, and we started just answering fundamental questions. I think either the podcast number 1 or podcast number 2 was, should I be scared of AI? I think that was podcast 2.
Don't hold back. Just give that answer out there.
And number 1 was, does AI matter? Which is interesting. So if AI matters, should we be scared of it? And then from that, we built a whole lot of stuff around AI Today, Cognilytica, which was focused more on the research. My background actually goes all the way back to MIT, where I was studying undergrad. My undergrad advisor was Rodney Brooks, who is well known during the second wave for building these tiny little robots that were able to self-navigate. But I didn't end up doing anything with it. It's just a coincidence, I guess. And it took like 30, 40 years for me to get back into it. So that's my beginnings. Maybe Kathleen, you want to piggyback on that?
Yeah, sure. So originally I had a background in marketing, but marketing and technology have continued to really come together. I think technology has started to make its way into every single industry, right? Where maybe it was a little more siloed before. It's really moved its way in. And so, as Ron mentioned, we worked together at Tech Breakfast. We started to see the power that AI, the potential that it had as well, because this was in the mid 2010s, like he said. And this was when that third wave of AI was really starting to come up again. People were starting to get interested, but it was still at the beginning. It was still nascent. And so even though AI had been around for a while, as we said, this third wave, what was powering it is we had a lot of venture capital investment. We had the power of big data, where we were able to actually manage data, because we need data in order for these systems to learn. And then we also, through that, a lot of these companies were saying, wow, look at what I can do. And as Ron mentioned, a lot of those FANG companies were really investing in this. And it's like, wow, look at the potential. I mean, I don't think that Netflix could be giving you these movie recommendations at the scale that it does if it didn't have AI. Amazon as well, with their recommendation systems. So we've started to see that. So like Ron said, in 2017, we started our AI Today podcast, where we were really able to kind of dig deeper into some of these fundamental concepts related to AI. Does AI matter? Why should I care about AI? We talked about the AI winters as well, and kind of what that means for the industry. The people that have been around in the second wave of AI are like, well, we've been here before. Part of the reason why we've had these 2 winters is that we overpromise and underdeliver on what we can do when it comes to AI. People get super excited and they go, oh my gosh, look at this. We have all this potential. We can do all this stuff. And in the first wave of AI, I mean, you think about, we didn't really have a lot of data. Our systems weren't that fast. So we wanted to have voice actually with pilots, and we just weren't able to handle it. We also had, translation was really bad back then. So we were over promising and under delivering on what we can do. And they said, you know what, actually, we can just do it another way, and it's going to be faster and quicker and cheaper and more accurate. So in this third wave of AI, we always are cautious about this, over promising and under delivering on what we can do, especially now that these large language models are out. They are magic, is what a lot of people call it, air quote magic, with what these systems can do. And you're like, look at this, I just give it a little bit of prompt text, and then it goes and it generates this entire article for me. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. But when you start digging a little bit deeper, people say that these systems can hallucinate, they don't always give you accurate information, and they can be confidently wrong. So you need to be understanding, okay, what are they doing? What are they saying? Do you have to fact check? Do you have to keep a human in the loop? So all of this stuff got us super excited and jazzed up. From what, as Ron mentioned, we were at Tech Breakfast. From there, we started our podcast, and we actually started an AI focused research and advisory firm that covered the market. And so, we tracked about 20,000 vendors in the space, which is a lot of vendors. And every time we would do some digging, we would uncover more companies, more funding. Funding is insane, out of control. I mean, seed rounds are millions of dollars. We're like, this is crazy. Some people, their A round was like $100 million for these AI companies. And it was hot. It still is hot. So we said, okay, and we tracked that. And then we actually started, when we were writing our reports, we said, okay, we had created a layer cake. And we said, we'll start at the base layer and kind of build our way up, fundamentally up this cake. And we started with data labeling. And it ended up being a super kind of niche, hot industry, where we uncovered so many companies. Our last report that we had done, I think we covered about 153 companies, started from about 12 in some of the earlier years that we were covering that space. And so from there, it's just evolved. We're based in the DC region. The government is doing a lot with this. It always has been doing a lot, but now different agencies outside of kind of that DoD focus that was the original push for AI are doing a lot around artificial intelligence. And so we wanted to kind of get that whole ecosystem involved and say, okay, this is how private companies are doing it. This is what the government is doing. So on our AI Today podcast, we do interview both government and private industry, but we have a lot of those players. And we love to talk to all of them because we get to see kind of that broad range. Also, what's interesting about AI is that some technologies have a center of focus, or it could be Silicon Valley, or it could be New York and with fintech, but AI really is global. And so we've been able to interview companies from around the world because of that and really kind of get that global perspective on things.
That's awesome. You guys are so enthusiastic. It's so fun to talk to you about this stuff. It's like, it's great to see someone like so into what they're talking about. Can we talk? I know you've got a lot on your plate. You've got work, you've got friends, you've got family, pets, you've got the people that you make small talk with at the coffee shop or gym. You've got that bird that you see when you wake up every morning outside your window that you've projected things onto. Look at that bird. Doesn't even love its family. It's always by itself. You do that. Everyone does that. Point is, you've got a lot on your plate. Well, that's why there's Instacart, to take a little bit off your plate. Using Instacart, you search for all your favorite foods and things that you need from the grocery store, all online, all while you're looking at that bird, wondering why it hasn't called its mom. And they deliver it to you. They go to the store and do the shopping for you. And they can deliver it in as fast as an hour. And you can sign up by clicking the link in the description, wherever you're listening or watching. And that's a great way of supporting the show. So it's a great way of supporting this show. It's a great way to make your life a little bit easier, because we all know that you have so much going on, like wondering whether that bird judges you back. So for background, right, I don't know much about coding or AI. So a term I often hear about, and something that you've already mentioned, is we're teaching our systems to learn. When you're teaching an AI to learn, it may depend on the product that you're developing. But in a sense, like, what does that mean? What is it doing?
Yeah, so the core of what we're doing right now with artificial intelligence is machine learning, which is the core of that term. And the idea is that machines are fundamentally, we didn't invent a new kind of computer. It's still like ones and zeros and bits,
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is that machines are good at pattern matching. They're good at finding patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea behind machine learning is that, well, if you can find these patterns and then basically represent those patterns in something called a model, then over time, this amount of learning, which is, think about what your brain is doing. It's like you're learning these patterns, and that you say, well, hey, let's keep those patterns around and let's keep making these patterns stronger and stronger and stronger, so that as we add more data, then we could start doing these more powerful things. There's actually 3 kinds of learning. If you want to be more specific, there's something called supervised learning, where you're basically teaching by example. And the best way of doing this is like when you're trying to say, is there a cat in this image? It's called image recognition. It's like, and you go, here's a cat, here's a cat, here's a cat, here's a cat. Every single time you do those like little recaptchas where it's like, is there a motorcycle in this image? You're training a machine learning model, right? It probably already knows the answer, but you're just confirming whether or not the model.
I knew I was right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's called supervised learning. Another one is called unsupervised learning, where the machine is spotting patterns. It's just trying to find clusters, what goes with and what does not go with. Anomaly detection. Your credit card systems do this when they're trying to do fraud, for example. Say,
okay,
hey, this doesn't look like this. This doesn't look like a normal transaction. Or when you're shopping on Amazon and it says, "Hey, I think you might want these marshmallows with your sleeping bag." You're like, "Why would you recommend a completely different category?" Well, because it's spotted a pattern here. People buy one thing tend to buy another. Very not super sophisticated. That's the thing. A lot of these things aren't that sophisticated. And then the third pattern is called reinforcement learning, which is called learning by trial and error, just trying things over and over again. That tends to work mostly with games, especially chess, more advanced forms of games where maybe there isn't a single answer, but there's a way to do it. Anyway, all these things group under this idea of machine learning. And the thing about machine learning that's both cool and scary is that these machine learning models, they kind of grow and build over time. And that's why it seems like things are just accelerating. You're like, wait a second here. It was only like a year ago when things could recognize a face with facial recognition. Now I'm like on TikTok and I'm putting my camera and it's making me look like Celine Dion. I don't know why I picked that name, but it's like making me
whatever you do on your TikTok, it's your thing.
Whatever.
That sounds fun.
It is, like whatever the thing is you want to do, like
that,
and then all of a sudden, like the next thing, like, oh, now we're doing some deep fake videos here. It's we sort of crossed this
scary line. Yeah.
Right, because these models kind of they can keep learning, right? And they don't just learn from scratch. It's not like, okay, new application from scratch. And what the big sort of advancements in AI technology have been new ways of building models, new algorithms for learning, and also new ways of combining models together, which is what this GPT thing is and things like that. It's like combinations of models where it's like, oh, I've already trained it on this. Maybe if I do a little extra this, it can do something amazing. And then people say, okay, great, now I'm going to use that and put something else on top of it. And it's
just a big Lego set that you can just add to and grow from there.
Well, it actually is speeding up. Things are really accelerating.
Good. It's that we're not losing our minds, right? Yeah. Well, when you talk about creating patterns or recognizing patterns, what's validating that? Is there a person there, or is it validating itself? Like, for example, in the marshmallow example, you're buying things for s'mores and then someone orders a thing of spaghetti. Is it just, is it like customer interaction, or is it the machine is able to figure out for itself and just trying different things?
Usually the way it works is that the machine's making a guess, basically, a lot of times. And there's a whole approach to building these models. And one of these, actually, we do a training on this, is a methodology for running AI projects. And one of the steps is called evaluation, where you check to see if the model is providing useful results. You don't put it out there unless it does. And usually what you do is you compare it against something. So the best example that I can have for your listeners who may not be technical is Amazon actually talked about this in one of their keynotes. They said that they were recommending movies, like movies that you might be interested in buying. I guess it was for Prime or for something else. And the heuristic, which is basically the quick and dirty way of doing things, the way that you would, if I said, hey, solve this problem, and you had to think of something quickly, like off the cuff, that's called a heuristic. It's like a mental shortcut.
Okay.
Something. Well, the heuristic would be like, why don't I just recommend the top 10 movies, the ones that people have bought the most, right? And they're saying, well, that may not be the ones you're interested in, but let's come up with a machine learning model that may recommend movies that you might be more interested than just the top 10. It turns out that it was hard to beat the top 10. Usually humans, for whatever reason, we're really good at picking the thing that's of the most interest. The New York Times top bestseller list, it's probably a bestseller list for a reason, generally.
Why fight it? Yeah.
Exactly. So it works. But then they were trying models until all of a sudden one of their models did start consistently beating the top 10. And that's when you replace it. And it's approaches like that that works. So it's not just you put it out there and hope for the best. Although there have been many examples of that, of people doing that and having major failures.
Exactly. So don't do that.
Colossal failures when that happens. Yeah.
I'm curious, what are some of the hurdles related to advancing AI? Like what's on the front lines that could be holding it back?
So, I mean, there's a few things I think in general. So sometimes it's data, right? At organizations, data, we always say, is at the heart of AI, especially machine learning. You need good, clean data. For supervised learning, you need it to be well labeled as well. And organizations, just depending on how they are, getting that data can be quite challenging. Sometimes there could be data silos at organizations, so they don't really want a lot of data sharing. There can also be privacy issues and concerns, and sometimes just gathering that data itself. So that's one challenge. Also, talent is another challenge. It can be difficult to get this talent and be able to pay for the talent. There's tools out there now that I think are helping. Also, basic education as well. I think over the past few years, there's really been an awareness with people and their data footprint, how much data is being created and consumed, and how it's being used. So folks are aware of that more. But those really are two of the main challenges, kind of that data aspect to this and then that talent aspect.
Oh man, yeah. One of life's mysteries is that birthdays always find me unprepared, catch me unprepared. I don't go on Facebook as much, so I don't notice them as much. But I want to express my love and appreciation for friends and family. That wasn't part of the copy, I'm just saying it. Year after year, month after month. Even when I see it coming, I'm not ready. Am I a jerk? Yes and no. Why do things have to be so black and white for you? But I've got great news, friends. Introducing monthly card subscriptions from the Cardist Studio. Join the service that delivers the card and the stamp that you'll need to your door. No more errands. Who wants more errands? I don't know why, but I'm starting to think of errands as a kid's name. Errands, go back to bed. Okay, but here's how it works. You choose your categories, from birthdays and celebrations to love and encouragement, or select their full collections and have those thank you notes and just because cards at the ready. Those ones are always so nice. Like when you get a card for doing something and it's just like a small little heads up or token of appreciation, it genuinely makes you feel really good. And best of all, you would never get caught cardless again. Let me repeat, you'll never get caught cardless again. Try to say that a bunch of times in a row. You'll never get caught cardless again. Monthly card subscriptions from as little as $8 per month for the card and the stamp. Delivered to you. TheCardistStudio.com shop subscriptions. And you can use the promo code AnxietyPod for 15% off your originating order. So I want to jump into the aspects of anxiety. And Kathleen, you had touched on this before. One of the main things that people talk about is automation and people losing their jobs. I mean, it's terrifying. In my day job, I'm a writer, and I'm middle-aged, right? Like, could I learn a new job if AI comes and takes my job? I don't know. Well, I guess we'll find out. But I'm curious your thoughts on whether or not the job loss that AI is coming for your job may be overblown in some senses, or where you land on that.
Yeah, so it's interesting you bring this up because we actually had this conversation about a month ago. A few years ago, we had written an article that said AI is not a job killer, but it is a job category killer. So what we meant by that was, if you look back at the 1960s, for example, I always picture Mad Men, the TV show, and there were rooms of secretaries, right? Flash forward to today, we no longer have rooms of secretaries, but we didn't have mass unemployment. Well, one job didn't go away, but it declined. And then we had other jobs that were created. Back in the 1960s, we didn't have social media marketers, for example. Now we do. So we always had kind of this ebb and flow. But recently, with Chat GPT and these large language models, Google Bard, we said, what is that going to do? Is that really going to maybe replace some people's jobs? And I mean, it's still up for debate, but it might not fully replace people in those industries, but it might mean we need less of them, for example. So do we need less lawyers because we have automation and we have AI technologies that are able to do a lot of that discovery for us and be able to write different things for us? And then you just have a lawyer go in and review it at the end, maybe write contracts, write different things, have a lawyer go in and review it at the end. But we only need one lawyer, where maybe before you needed 10 in order to do all of that work. So that was a debate that we had. And we said, we said originally it wasn't a job killer, but maybe is it going to be a job killer just at the pace that it's been accelerating things so recently?
Yeah, there are a lot of sort of counterintuitive things. Like there's a thing called the Amazon. I don't like to bring Amazon up so much. I don't know why, but they do come up a lot in this conversation. So
you own Amazon stock, yes.
It's a dangerous thing to own. But if there's a thing actually called the Amazon paradox, which is this idea that as Amazon was increasing the automation in their warehouses, they had these things called Kiva bots that would go in. If you look at the actual Amazon fulfillment, those shelves are stacked high and very close, and they're not meant for humans, because the alternative would be like somebody going in there with a forklift or something, moving some stuff around, very inefficient. So as they started investing more and more and more in automation, you would have thought, okay, warehouse jobs at Amazon facilities would have declined, but actually the opposite was happening. They were actually hiring more and more people in their warehouses, which is a bit of a paradox. You're like, well, why is this happening? Well, what happened was that because of the speed of fulfillment was increasing, they started offering the services you're familiar with: same day, next day, prime delivery, and basically the jobs just shifted. And because those other jobs were higher value jobs, then basically there became more of them. They're like, oh, now the expression is, with automation, a lot of the low hanging fruit, the things that are easy to automate, will probably be automated, but it's taking the robot out of the human, is usually the way that it's explained, which is that let's say your job is to write a research piece, but you're spending 6 hours of the day doing highly mechanical tasks of like collecting data and aggregating. We're like, well, what if you can give that to the automation component? You recover those 6 hours. Now, maybe you can greatly increase the volume of articles you're creating, or maybe you can go more long form. I mean, there's lots of ways of doing it. That's where the jury is out. We're like, well, is that going to happen? Are we going to start seeing the evolution? In which case, if that does happen, then companies will start feeling more pressure to compete. A good analogy is if any sort of major retail outlet now has self-checkout. And the concern was that self-checkout would basically get rid of all the lanes, which it did, to register lanes, but it didn't really result in mass unemployment in retail. It just kind of shifted focus. And it's interesting. Basically, I look at that and say, well, there's probably some analogy in every industry. Like every industry has its equivalent of the self-checkout lane.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the general sense I'm getting is that it's okay. We're going to be okay. Like you may have to shift a little bit, but the economy will, and you will be fine. Yeah, that's great. This was not a question in my initial line of questioning, but it's something that piqued my interest from what you guys have been saying. Early on in your podcast, you were describing how you were asking the question, does AI matter and should I care about that? What is that? I mean, because to me, you have an AI podcast, you're in the industry. The question doesn't seem like a question to me. It seems like, yes, it is important, but I'm curious, what does that question look like, and what was the debate around that like?
Yeah, well, the origin of the question was the fact that it's like, well, are we talking about something that is this esoteric science fiction-y thing which won't really impact my life or impact my organization, and therefore it's interesting, it's a curiosity, but will it actually really matter? Of course, the answer ends up being yes, it does matter, because whether or not you are yourself impacted, that other people are and will be, so therefore it will impact you. But we keep asking this question, although it's becoming less and less of of a question.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, at this point, I mean, back in 2017, you have to think the world was a lot different, right? I mean, this was 6 years ago. Voice assistants were just starting to come out, right? I mean, we've evolved a long way since then. And so we said, yeah, does it matter? Because is it going to be something that does touch our everyday lives in a meaningful way? Or is it going to be something that is just used by organizations and not something that we necessarily see? And so, as Ron said, we maybe not on our podcast do we talk about it all the time, but we do continually address that question and say, does this still matter? Why does this still matter? Should we be scared of this? Where's it going? And so it's important to continue to reflect on that.
Yeah. Well, there's got to be so much fun in having these almost existential questions, right? A lot of AI you hear about is trying to mimic being human. And then the next question is, well, what does it mean to be human? I mean, like it goes from one to
the philosophical debates, right?
Yeah. Which I think is so fun.
And we joke about that because we say, you don't get that in other emerging technology, like with cybersecurity, for example. People aren't debating like that. But with artificial intelligence, it does bring that up.
Yeah. Well, can you give me, this may not be something that you can speak to, but like, how does the industry sort of tackle that question, right? If they're trying to mimic humanity, how do you do that in code? You know what I mean?
So there's two different ways that we look at this. So we say there's narrow AI and then there's artificial general intelligence. And artificial general intelligence is that idea of having this machine, this human-like machine where it's able to do everything that a human can. We are not there. We do not have AGI. Right now, all of our applications are narrow AI. And that doesn't mean that it's not powerful. It is powerful. It's able to do one task well. So when we were looking at this, we broke it down further and we came up with the 7 patterns of AI because we said, well, if you're talking about artificial intelligence or machine learning, you may be talking about an AI-enabled chatbot. I may be talking about an autonomous vehicle. Ron may be talking about a personalization recommendation system. They all fall under that broad general umbrella, but they're all very different. The data that you need, they're different in the algorithms that you're going to use. They're different in the time that it's going to need to build it. Maybe you're retraining, all of this stuff. So we said, all right, well, we're going to break it down that way. And when you look at it that way, you're able to say, okay, if I'm building a conversational system, I'm going to need this data. I'm going to need this. Maybe I'm going to use this algorithm, or I can work with this that's already done it. And so it kind of helps break that down.
Yeah. Oh man. So complicated and fun. But yes, thank you for that explanation. Yeah. I always notice in the video on these podcasts where my shoulders tend to come up. I'm going to look like a vulture, like Larry King. I don't know when I don't just sit back. I just like to be forward and in your face. Which, if you're listening and not watching, that's an irrelevant statement. But really enjoyed my conversation with Kathleen and Ron. So thank you so much to them. And make sure you come back next week for part 2 of my discussion on AI with them. Before I get to the weird thing causing me anxiety this week, I just wanted to remind you of the Buy Me a Coffee link, just a way to make a donation or a tip to the show. That link is in the description, along with a link to Pure Spectrum CBD, who offer the promo code AnxietyPod for 15% off. If you want to sign up for home delivery for groceries, you can do so through the link for Instacart in the description. Signing up that way tells them that this show sent you, which also helps support the show. And also, please support the cardists who offer the promo code AnxietyPod as well for 15% off your initial order. You know, sometimes these ad reads, they go smooth and sometimes they don't. You know, that's life as a middle-aged anxious person. Okay, so the weird thing caused me anxiety this week. Jamie and I actually reached a decision on like catering for our wedding, and like when we made the decision, it actually it just caused anxiety because I don't know, it should have been like a huge weight off my shoulders, our shoulders, but there's just been a lot of people weighing in, and it was expensive. But yeah, so I don't know. Maybe it's just like finally making a decision allowed the worry of like, did we make the right decision? After a couple days, it feels good, But yeah, it almost caused an anxiety attack. I'm laughing, but it did get to that level. But feeling better now, so yeah. Sometimes these are funnier, and sometimes these are very realistic. So you got a realistic one this week. Well, as always, thank you so much for listening. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.